Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to Eloqua Preference Management Masterclass. Let's see if we can hold up to that promise. All right, let's jump in. So for the next 45 minutes, what are we covering? So we'll a little bit of welcome, move into Q&A. I think we had one question submitted this month, so we'll go ahead and try and answer that one for you. And then dive into the aspects of a preference center, looking at essentially what your subscribers are wanting, and generally speaking, they want choice. So we're going to look at ways to help you manage that and offer that in such a way that's convenient and easy for them to do. What sort of data should you collect? There's all sorts of things you can collect, but what's the really important data that you need, and what makes the most sense for your organization? And then once you've got all that data, how do you use that to tailor what it is you're trying to do as an organization with campaigns, etc., and more? So we'll explore a little bit of that. In relation to release 24B, we kind of covered that in more detail last month. And release 24C, which is the next one, due in August, was just released last night, my time. So the details, that is. So I'm waiting on that information. So we'll probably end up putting that into the blog post, and we can cover that off next month as well. But let's keep going. So housekeeping. For those of you that join regularly, you know that we use Zoom to host our webinars, and replays are always available from our blog. But you'll also receive an email, of course, letting you know and giving you access to those replays. Please feel free to use the Q&A as we go through the webinar. And you can also use the chat function as well if you'd rather ask a private question and not have that be visible to everybody. My name is Derek Bell. I'm your host for today, and I'm riding solo tonight. So I'll just be juggling, trying to keep an eye on Q&A and chat, etc., as we move through. So bear with me as we do that. But let's jump in and have a look at the first question that was submitted. So Samantha is from the US. She's an e-marketing specialist. And she's talking about Salesforce and Eloqua integration and some of the possibilities that are available. So is there a way to trigger a change on a form for Salesforce to receive? For example, if a checkbox in an Eloqua form is clicked or left blank, can we get that to trigger an alert in Salesforce? So just looking at others who are on the call today, some of you will have Salesforce integration with Eloqua, so this is pertinent. Fundamentally, though, the same response, I suppose, is really applicable to most levels of integration with Eloqua and CRM platforms, but specifically looking at Salesforce in this instance. So yeah, there are really two parts to the answer, and another option, even the third, I would say. So yes, you can use form processing steps and a program, combine the two, to take advantage of the existing Eloqua Salesforce CRM integration. So there is already integration in play, and it will depend how that configuration has been set up. For example, some organizations will, as soon as a net new individual comes from Google or wherever they may come to the website, fill in a form. If they're brand new to the database, i.e. a net new contact, then some people will have the configuration for the integration set up in such a way that they are immediately created as a lead within Salesforce. That's one option. Then if there's information you wanted to pass specifically in relation to the form, that information can be passed through to the lead in sort of like a comment section or an activity. You can create an activity which can then be assigned using the CRM logic to do the assignment of that particular lead and the activity that's associated with it. But based on the requirements, if you wanted to get a little bit more specific, then you could start to use the conditional form processing steps. So you may have somebody complete the form who is already a known entity to you, or it could be a net new individual. So regardless of which it is, you could then create a separate update in the form processing steps to actually create a task or an activity within the platform. So the the term that was used was an alert. So the actual phrase from a Salesforce point of view would probably be a task. Okay. And so Eloqua has the ability to create a task in Salesforce using the integration between the two. And so again, you would use probably a separate form processing step in order to do that, and just use the conditional element to control it. So is the tick box checked or not checked? If it is checked, that would imply then you want to potentially create the task, and that's fine. You can then create the task associated to that lead or contact within the CRM platform. So, and that's the same actually. And then if you're doing case management, a separate area of Salesforce CRM, and case management is available both in Service Cloud and Sales Cloud, you could raise a case as well. So that's another way to do it. So there are a few different ways that you could go about that process. Hopefully one of those is what works for you and what you need. If you have any questions, of course, please drop us an email, and happy to talk you through that one in a little bit more detail. But the answer is yes, essentially. All right, let's jump in and start to have a little bit more of a look at preference centers and what we're looking at. So at the end of the day, what we want to try and do to make the most sense out of what we're trying to achieve is to put the customer, could be a customer, it could be a prospective student, it could be a member of an association, etc., anything like that, any type of audience member you want to talk to. We want to put them at the center of this whole process that we're looking at and trying to explore. And the key thing we know is that subscribers, let's call them subscribers, they want choice. And so then it's up to us as marketers, well, how do we deliver that choice? So let's dive in and have a little bit of a look at preference management kind of 101 to start with. So the fundamentals from an Eloqua point of view is that when a net new contact, that is a brand new contact, comes into Eloqua, Eloqua assumes that you have the appropriate opt-ins in place. Okay, so that means you've got a checkbox on the form, for instance, or maybe it's a drop down where they say yes or no in relation to opting into future marketing campaigns. Because not all of the campaigns that you necessarily run out of Eloqua are marketing campaigns. You might have updates for shareholders. You might have partners, business partners, channel partners that you talk to as well. And so there are more business-oriented communications, not just simply marketing communications. Now, as soon as they're created in Eloqua, the default is they are subscribed globally, okay? So there's no if, buts, or maybes in that one. As soon as they come into the platform, and the point here is regardless of where they come into the platform, Eloqua is just one channel, just one way they can get into into the CRM, for instance. There are all sorts of directions they can come from. So as soon as they hit Eloqua, however they get there, they are subscribed globally. And that's the next step, is to start looking at email groups and how email groups can really help you manage those subscriptions within the platform. So email groups are an incredibly helpful tool. We'll talk a little bit more about those here in just a few moments. But let's look at a graphic. Sometimes the graphic helps, right? So we have an unknown contact, someone who the business or the university or your organization has not seen before. They come to the website. They may go straight to a subscription center or preference center, depending on how you configure that or display that, or they may fill in a form in order to access some information, or maybe it's simply a contact us form that they do. So as long as there's or not as long as, there should be in place appropriate language as to opting in that particular scenario. Okay, so let's assume that's a yes. They say yes, they tick the box. They come into Eloqua, and now they're a known contact. And so they're a known contact because now we have an email address, hopefully matched with first name and last name. So for those people who are on the line in relation to using Salesforce CRM, remember, if your objective here is to create leads in the CRM, then you must have two pieces of information. Actually, I think Salesforce actually only requires a surname on a lead. I think that's the absolute bare minimum piece of information, and Eloqua's bare minimum is an email. So if we wanted to go from Eloqua to Salesforce and actually be created through the integration, then you must have at least email and surname. Now, of course, it's pretty rare that you're going to ask only for a surname. The logical path would be to ask for first name, last name, and email address. That would probably be your bare minimums from that point of view. But as far as Eloqua is concerned, if there's an email address, they're now a known contact and somebody that you can communicate with, and it's somebody who is opted in. Now, from Eloqua, it's pretty normal that you would have some integration set up to go somewhere. And whether it's a CRM platform, if you're a university, it could be a student management platform of some sort. Oracle have a couple of solutions, Service Cloud, which is quite popular in universities. So there are a range of places that data will then flow to. Now, from the CRM, within your own organization, it's possible that it may go elsewhere. So maybe there's another arrow at the other side of that CRM server or application, and it could go to a ERP platform, for example. The other one in Eloqua, and there's some dotted lines there, is sending information to a custom object. Now, we're going to cover that a little bit more later as to why that could also be a good thing for you to do. It's not done by default, by the way. It's something that you do need to set up, but there's certainly some merit to doing that. Okay. So when essentially Eloqua shows you when a person initially opts in, and that information is available on the contact. So on the contact, you'll see the date created field. And at that point, you'll also see that they're subscribed globally. Now, if you're a larger organization, perhaps multinational, and you have Eloqua, and Eloqua could be a single database that is actually used by multiple business units within the organization. So when somebody fills in a form and they're opting in, what is it they're actually opting into? Are they opting into, let's see if I can think of a common American company name. I don't know why, but Home Depot comes to mind. Okay, so am I opting into Home Depot Inc., the American entity, or am I opting into Home Depot Canada, for example? Two separate legal entities that probably, with different legislation in both of those countries, would have different requirements, but you're actually using the same instance of Eloqua. So the marketing team at Home Depot, I'd have no idea if they're an Eloqua client, by the way. I'm just picking on the brand. They may have a single instance of Eloqua that teams within the US and Canada both access to send information out to. So there is configuration available. Eloqua is an enterprise solution, so it does manage these enterprise scenarios easily. It certainly can be done. So if that's a challenge in your part of the world, in what you're doing, well, you either hopefully already have that set up. If not, please reach out and we can have a chat in relation to that one. So when they first come in, they're opted in. So that's kind of the baseline, right? They're opted in, and as Eloqua says, they're subscribed globally at that particular point. So that's where you can see it on the actual contact. So you can see the date created, and then the status of subscribed globally and the nice little green button telling you that they are currently subscribed. Okay, it's a valid email address and okay to receive HTML emails. Now, the next step for us as marketers, and specifically Eloqua users, is to utilize the email group construct within Eloqua. So they're opted in and we can email them anything we want. They don't specifically have to be subscribed to email groups in order for us to send them an email. But the nice thing is, if at some point they should choose to unsubscribe from a particular email group, but remain opted in to the brand, to your organization, then Eloqua will manage that and won't let you send an email to them if they're unsubscribed at an email group level. Okay, now the term email group doesn't mean a great deal. We try and then apply names to it, things that make a little bit more sense. And so here are just some examples. And these are probably the more standard things that I see customers using in relation to their email groups. Now, I notice we have a couple of people on board here today from universities, and universities are a great example because it's really a microcosm of a business at the end of the day, because you'll have the university, and then within the university, you have multiple faculties. And so some universities will choose to have an email group per faculty, for example. And then underneath that, they might capture preferences around event information, webinars, class updates. There could be a whole range of other types of services or subscriptions that they would offer underneath those as well. Okay. Now, when do you ask? Now, what's the question that we're asking? So the question we're asking is, when's the best time to present a preference center to people? So The key thing is we don't want to be delivering a preference center experience to somebody when they're at a point that they actually want to opt out. Okay, it's a bit late at that point to try and wow them and excite them with all the various things that you've got to offer if they're actually at a point where I'm just wanting to unsubscribe. This is so annoying. So don't ask the question at that point. We need to ask it much earlier in the engagement. So when somebody is net new, when they first come into your platform, that's the best time to be offering a preference center. So if we're getting people to fill in forms, and hopefully when they're filling in forms, our default scenario is that we send them a confirmation email. I don't care what it is, whether it's registering for a webinar, whether it's completing a contact us a form, whatever they're filling in and providing you with information, the bare minimum that we should be doing is sending a confirmation email to that particular person to certainly confirm that we've received the information, or here's the offer, here's what you asked for, et cetera, et cetera. And in those emails, we have an opportunity, while they're excited and while they're engaged and while they're in a spirit of wanting to give you information, perhaps, that's the opportunity to say, hey, we have a whole range of things that you may be interested in here. Visit our preference center and have a look at these other subscriptions and other pieces of information that could be helpful. Now, I might be showing my age here. Hopefully you kind of get this. If you build it, they will come. If I could maybe get some smiley faces or emoticons on the screen, that would be good. But anyway, the calls to action to visit the preference center is a perfect candidate in any autoresponder emails that you've got. So contact us forms, anything like that is sort of an autoresponder email. That's a great opportunity to put in some sort of a banner or a call to action to invite them to come to a preference center, because at the preference center, it's not only them picking different subscriptions, but potentially also using that as an opportunity to ask them a few more questions about them. So profile data that you might want to get. The other one to think about is net new contacts that come from the CRM platform. There are easy ways to identify that, because if they're net new to Eloqua, but they've come from the CRM platform, we can know that. We know we have ways of being able to determine that they've come from the CRM platform. And the other nice thing you've got there is the ability to personalize as well. So the owner, the contact owner within the CRM platform, that could actually be the person who the email comes from. Just a thought. Maybe not always necessary or appropriate, but just a thought. You could certainly do that. Now, once people are net new and they're in your database, maybe that's some sort of a welcome campaign. I say that differently to an onboarding campaign, because an onboarding campaign implies that they're probably a customer. They're giving you money, they're buying your products or your services. That's more of an onboarding campaign. A welcome campaign is, hey, look, you're not spending any money with us just yet, but we want to help you understand what we do, help us understand what your business problems are, what your challenges are, articulate those to us, and then we can better serve you with information that we send. Okay, so that personalization step that we're looking for. And look, I think times have changed. Look, you probably are, again, just looking at the group here today, you maybe have been around long enough, like I have, that we went through a phase where everybody was offering iPads, for instance, or it was iPods before that. Everyone was offering iPods. Fill in this form, give us this information, go into the chance to win an iPad or an iPod or whatever the case may be. I don't think we really need to do that these days. We just simply need to convey the value of what we're offering as an organization. And then we have a much better chance at getting people to provide us with more information about themselves. In trying to give you an example, it gets really hard because even today, as I look down the list, we've got clients here from manufacturing, from universities, from scientific organizations, a whole range of different sort of locations. And so what I've done is I've taken Hogwarts. We all know Harry Potter. I'm sure you've seen Harry Potter at some point. We all know the stories. And so I thought I'll just use Hogwarts University as an example. So types of subscriptions that you may want to offer. So the first type of subscription that we're looking at here is what I've called the Hermione Herald. And so maybe this is your baseline subscription. People come in, and this is kind of the baseline one, right? So it's talking about student life at Hogwarts. So if there are any campaigns that are being run around student life, then that would go under a Hermione Herald type of email group. So why study at Hogwarts? Why study magic at Hogwarts? Obviously, meet our Muggles, Ron's study tips, safety when casting spells at home. All of these things, maybe they all fall under the Hermione Herald. And so, as I said, they're looking at these are general types of communications. Now they could include lead nurture campaigns. So certainly, why study magic at Hogwarts? That probably would form a lead nurture campaign of some sort. Let's have a look at some others. So other ones, in-person events. So this is certainly something that I've seen become more popular in a post-pandemic world, where we sort of went from doing in-person events, the occasional webinar, to doing only webinars. Well, certainly in this part of the world, that was the case for the vast majority of 20 and 21. And so then we decided it was much better if we can get a preference from people or a subscription that was in-person events separate to webinars. And I'll show you that as the third option here in a moment. So maybe the in-person events that you run at a university, again, using this as an example, is annual campus tours. So it might line up with open days or study houses, etc., different types of events that you would hold at a university. Parent wizard evenings, the ability to book those in and have a look at those, or maybe ticket sales for Quidditch match days on the weekend is another in-person event. So if people are telling you they're subscribing to the in-person events, then they definitely want to receive that information. Now, let me just stop for a second. One of the roadblocks people seem to have sometimes when it comes to email groups in Eloqua is they start to develop the idea that, well, I can only email the people who are subscribed to in-person events. I can't send it to anybody else. That's not the case. That's not the case at all, unless you've got internal company policy that says otherwise. But from a structural point of view, the person has opted in to Hogwarts as a university. They've opted into the brand and they've opted into marketing communications. All we're doing with email groups is giving them the ability to be a little bit more specific and tell you what they're interested in. It's not there to exclude everybody else from those types of communications. Think of those who are subscribed using email groups as your baseline. So if we do have ticket sales coming up for Quidditch match days on the weekend, then the first people you are going to add to your segment are those people who have proactively told you, yes, I'm subscribed. I absolutely want to hear about anything to do with in-person events at Hogwarts University. So that's our baseline. And then you're going to add more people to that. And hopefully you'll use filtering and other types of things within segments to help you figure that out, and who would be most interested based on their profile and so on and so forth. So then we move to maybe a third type of subscription, which is webinar events. So this is now looking at campus day type events, but these are virtual. And again, this is something that we had done with a couple of universities in our part of the world prior to the pandemic. But certainly in that first year of 2020, it was the only option. And most of the marketers we deal with are largely the international marketing team. So it's marketers from Australia, New Zealand, and Asia, and a couple in the US who are predominantly marketing to overseas or international students to come and study in those respective countries. And so they kind of loved it. They thought it was great because now the university had no option but to do webinars. And this was fantastic because all of their international students at home in different countries could now have this amazing experience, just like kids who came on campus to attend open days. So maybe virtual parent wizard evenings as another way, and maybe Quidditch is not can't go in person, but maybe there's a live broadcast of the Quidditch match. And so if you're into those sorts of things and you're subscribed to webinars, well, we can absolutely send you an invitation to do that as well. And maybe a fourth one. Now this one is real, I suppose, in a number of cases, but not the most common one. And it's where you might generate a campaign-specific email group. Now, I'm the last person in the world to suggest to you that you should be creating email groups for every single campaign. That's crazy and doesn't make any sense, really. I hope no one's doing that. But anyway, so campaign specific. So let's say there are very serious proposed changes to the rules of Quidditch. And so that's a pretty significant process for Hogwarts. And so that's something they want to gather the right people for. And so they'd like to use the email group functionality to really be able to provide clarity around people who have subscribed and maybe those who have unsubscribed as well, so they don't bombard people that are genuinely not interested. Now, of course, if Professor Dumbledore is retiring, that's a pretty major event. You may choose to create an email group just for that one. You don't have to, but you may choose to do it. It could fall under your in-person events as well. Maybe you rename it so it's a little bit more general versus being about one individual. But if you feel it's important and it would be a good way to do it, then yeah, of course, you can do it. The other nice thing to remember with the email groups is there's a whole lot of reporting that you can extract from inside that is tailored directly around email groups, just as you can with a whole range of dashboards as well. Okay. So now that we've kind of got a bit of an idea about the different types of subscriptions that we might offer in a preference center, what sort of data should you collect? Well, that's a lengthy conversation at any time and will differ certainly for everybody on the call today. But the right questions is the answer. And the right questions depends on what you need and probably in good consultation with the sales team as well. Whoever in your organization has a sales type of role and is essentially going to be talking to the leads that you might be generating within this process, they will have a good idea as to the questions that we should be asking. So we probably need to talk to them and involve them in the process. But the first one and the most important one is the opt-in. So before we can kind of get anything happening, before the ball really starts to roll, we need to get that opt-in. And so fundamentally, that opt-in should be on every single form that you present to people. Now, whether it's a checkbox, whether it's a drop-down that says, yes, please opt me in, or no, don't, etc., whatever it is, the opt-in is the critical one that we need to get. Now, the other thing, and depending on the size of your organization, we'll also need to think about what happens in the call center, in the service team, in the sales team, if they're adding brand new contacts into the CRM platform. What evidence do we have? I mean, if they're just going to flow directly into Eloqua with the integration, what evidence do we have that they've actually opted into marketing communications? Okay. So that's where a welcome campaign can kind of come into the play, right? Where in the welcome campaign, we could invite them to not just opt in, but to also visit the preference center. And so that's where the preference center becomes really helpful, because imagine if you don't have a really well-structured preference center and you're just simply saying to people, hey, click here and opt in so we can send you stuff. Okay, it's not overly compelling. So what we want to try and do is make that opt-in process far more compelling, and that's where a preference center is a great tool to help you with that process. People love talking about themselves, so it's a great thing to be able to send them somewhere. They can tell you a little bit about them. They can tell you what they're interested in. They can pick their relevant subscriptions. It's a far more compelling argument than just simply click here to opt in, for example. All right, so preferences and subscriptions, and we like to refer to this as the data that matters. And you'll find on our blog, actually, if you search on our blog for the data that matters, there's a couple of replays from past events, and I think several blogs as well that probably touch on that same point. So at a bare minimum, when somebody fills in a form and they're brand new into Eloqua, or they've come in from the CRM platform and they're still brand new to Eloqua, then the date and time that they were created, you saw that image I showed you earlier from the contact in Eloqua, that's recorded and it's there. Doesn't change. Okay. Now, the good thing would be to bring additional information with it. And that is things like lead source, lead campaign, lead channel. There could be more, but what you need is some way to be able to identify not just the date and time the person came into the platform, but how they came into the platform. Okay, that can also be incredibly helpful. For those of you in Europe with GDPR, this is kind of like the baseline. And certainly here in Australia, in August of this year, in our world, our privacy, what we call the Privacy Act, is going to be updated. And we're all a bit terrified, just quietly. It's just going to be a lot of work, I think, in relation to how things are configured, the way things have to be done in order to be compliant. Now, the US market, you guys are lucky. You're kind of a little bit lax compared to the rest of the world, which is kind of nice. Um, but things may change. You never know. And the good thing is, our clients in Europe with the GDPR, and certainly here in Australia, Eloqua is able to cater for all of these different configurations and able to provide a great experience. So wherever it goes, we can help. Same with California. California is a little bit different to the rest of the United States in relation to what's required there. And so again, we can help with all that sort of stuff. So that lead source, campaign, and channel, they're often the UTM values that you may include within relevant URLs that direct people to a form. So once they get to the form from your website, you'll have UTM parameters usually in the URL, and that could be lead source, lead campaign, lead channel, whatever it may be. And we can bring that information into Eloqua to give you more context. And so a preference center can play a nice part in that whole process, ensuring that that information is transferred as well. One thing to think about is what we call the personally identifiable data, or PII data. So PII data can be problematic, and it will depend on your organization. So as I think here, I might, Patricia, I can see you're on the line today. And so from a university point of view, often the information that marketing is collecting is, yes, it's personally identifiable, but it's largely probably more around first name, last name, email address, maybe the home state, maybe down to the city or zip code potentially. You may collect a cell phone number as well, but then it's probably largely preferences and interests that you're capturing. However, at the point of application, that's where the information typically is not really captured by Eloqua, but probably is now a more student management type of platform. And so this is where the individual, the applicant, or the prospective student will be giving a lot more personally identifiable information. This may now come down to driver's license numbers. It could be a credit card number. It could be mum and dad's contact details and birth dates and social security numbers and all that kind of stuff may be required. I'm not crystal clear on the application process in the US. I'm kind of making some guesses there. But yeah, so that personally identifiable data, generally speaking, from an Eloqua point of view, we want to try and stay away from that as much as possible, largely because it just adds unnecessary risk. And certainly risk is something we're all trying to avoid. And that data sort of belongs elsewhere anyway. But if you do have that PII data stored in Eloqua for whatever reason that you need it, it may not be necessary to have it in the form that you have it. Let me give you a quick example. So in the financial services world, we had a client several years ago who was really keen to sort of be able to communicate to their credit card users. It was their corporate card solution based on the level of spend. And so they had that information. They could see it when they logged into, in this case, in Salesforce CRM. They could see the individual. They could see the monthly spend that was happening, along with a little bit more granular detail, etc. They said, look, we don't need that granular detail, but let's take that dollar figure and bring that into Eloqua, because then we can create segments based on the dollar values. Well, that raised a few alarm bells in relation to, look, we know the data's secure in Eloqua, that's fine, but in principle, do we really need to have the dollar value against the individual customers stored in another platform? And so what we did is we changed it around and we moved to a gold, silver, bronze scenario. And my recollection is, I think you were a bronze if you had less than 2,000 spend a month. I think if you were less than 10,000 spend, you were silver. And if you were or more maybe, but if you were more than $20,000 a month, then you were a gold client. And so in Eloqua, that's all we saw. We just saw a contact and we had spend status was either gold, silver, or bronze. So the key point there is we don't necessarily need to bring data in its raw form directly into Eloqua, we can do some manipulation along the way to ensure that the data sitting in Eloqua is really not personally identifiable in any way. You could rate them 1, 2, 3, whatever you wanted to, you would use, just as long as collectively, obviously, your Eloqua team know what it means, so you can create your relevant segments. But all of that information can come through from various platforms and can help to drive potentially different preferences, because you may offer different types of clients different things in your preference center based on their level of engagement or their investment as a client with you. So another way to think about it. Now, forms are fun, but forms are also that entry point. And it's very easy as Eloqua clients to end up with multiple forms and many, many forms. And so what can be a challenge sometimes is making sure all of those forms conform and conform to an opt-in policy. So do they all contain a tick box? Are they all on the ball? Are they accurate? Are they functioning as they should? And there are all sorts of ways that you can potentially streamline forms so that you could use programs to help with some of the data manipulation that you want to do. The upside of doing that is if you decide you need to change something in a process, then you can actually just simply update the program versus having to go to all of those forms individually and make individual form processing alterations. So forms, form processing steps, and programs can actually work really nicely together to help you streamline and deliver a more consistent experience and maybe a more compliant experience as well as you go through that process. Now, when it comes to the preference center, I would suggest to you that it really needs to be an enterprise-wide discussion, okay? Because it's very easy for us marketers just to kind of sit here and go, well, we know exactly what our clients want. But there's also the service team, and there's also the sales team, and there's also the finance team. Okay, so from an enterprise-wide point of view, you really need to think more broadly and go beyond the marketing team and have a chat to the business and get the business on board with what this preference center is going to do. So if you think about forms, so obviously Eloqua provides you with great form functionality, but these days it's very easy to throw a form up. If you run Google's G Suite solution, which they've changed the name of, and I can't remember, but the Google G Suite solution, there's form capability in that. And I'm sure Microsoft have form capability in that as well. So individual parts of the business could be throwing forms up because they need clients to fill in something, etc. But does that form conform? That doesn't really work well together. Does it form conform? Does that form meet the requirements of your policies and your procedures in relation to collecting of data, etc.? Okay, so just think that one through, because it's so easy to create forms these days in a whole range of different platforms. But is there agreement on the data that matters? Now, quickly had a client just a couple of, well, would have been a month ago. We sat down and they were just having some issues in relation to forms, and they were trying to get lead score models put together, but there was disparity in relation to the way the data was coming into Eloqua. And this was because there was too many silos within the organization, which meant that even silly things like lists of countries weren't even the same. I mean, there's only so many countries on the planet, but either some had taken full formal names of countries, others had used slider abbreviations, for instance, etc., which then meant they didn't match. For instance, the values weren't the same. So getting agreement on the data that matters is really critical, and using that baseline, and your preference center is the perfect place to do that, is to get agreement from everybody as to what's the baseline information that we really need. If somebody's in the mood to provide us with information, what's the baseline information that we need, or minimum amount of information? Now, think about also your other sources. So like the CRM, as we said, sometimes have minimum levels of information. We know, for instance, with Salesforce CRM, you can't create a lead in Salesforce as a CRM platform without having a surname. So simply grabbing an email address from an Eloqua campaign point of view is not sufficient in relation to what you're trying to do there. So continuing our enterprise-wide discussion, Essentially, your form exists in two parts. And you know this if you've been building forms for a while in Eloqua. There's the form questions that people will see when you post that form and it's live on a landing page. First name, last name, email address, and you may ask other questions. But then, of course, there's the hidden fields as well. And it's those hidden fields that can contain those UTM values that we talked about. They can contain a whole range of other things as well. I largely use hidden fields probably from a field merge point of view, because when I have net new contacts filling in those forms, I want to put in as much information as possible. Or if it's a known contact that I don't have a lot of information on, but now I've got them associated to an account, well, I can add more information. And so forms are quite helpful in helping me go through that process. Now, the other thing from a compliance and governance tip, and this is just kind of like just a suggestion, and this is where that custom object comes into play that I talked about earlier. So when the contact comes in, they fill in the form, they come into Eloqua, they typically get sent on to the CRM, and I had that arrow going down to a custom object. Now, the nice thing about a custom object is that you can store things in two ways. You can store it based on the email address, and every single time that email address submits a form, we create a new entry in the custom object. Okay, so it just keeps growing and growing and growing. The alternative is that we change it so when that email address submits a form a second time, it then overrides the information that is already in place. Both have their application and both are perfectly fine. It just depends. Let me give you the scenario where maybe that last option is not the best one. So we have someone who's come into your database in 2016, 13th of July, they've opted in, etc. You've captured that information and you've created them within the custom object within Eloqua to hold that information and store it. However, in June of 2019, they opted out. So we have two options here. They come to the custom object. Do we now add a second row of information to store that? So we see both the opt-in in 2016, then we can see the opt-out in 2019. Now, it gets a little bit more confusing because what happens if they decide to opt back in again? Now, this is obviously not unheard of. This is not a crazy scenario. It certainly happens. And maybe it was the 4th of July this year. They'd finished with their dinner and their family barbecue and all those sorts of fun things and hit the laptop. And they're like, oh, I need that information. I'll have to go back to the website. Oh, I've got to opt back in, etc. Two options here, okay? There is merit in both, as I said, but certainly from a preference center point of view and a compliance and governance point of view, I would suggest to you that the creation of these three entries within the custom object are best done if you keep all three of them. So you'll be able to see over time. So if at some point in the future, this individual chooses to opt out again, so now we have a fourth activity that's happened, and for whatever reason they may complain or want information from you, you've got absolute clarity through that custom object and it's there for perpetuity. Because remember, the digital body language on the contact that you might see in Profiler or other areas of Eloqua is essentially kept for 2 years. Okay, so the custom object, it's kind of there forever. All right, so what does your preference center potentially look like? I use the Hogwarts example again to kind of continue that analogy. So Hogwarts may have 3 different sections. So first of all, profile questions, a little bit of detail about the person, who they are, maybe where they're from, etc. Just that core profile information. Then you may move to subscriptions where you offer them specific things that you may want to do, whether it's newsletters, maybe it's events, maybe it's webinars, whatever works in your world. And then their preferences and their interests. Okay, so give them the ability to, you don't want to be overwhelmed, but maybe you present them with, say, 9 or so, or maybe a few more interests that relate to you. Also relate to them, but obviously with underlying content that you're going to actually be able to do something with when it goes through. Now, the sequencing of those could be in any direction. What I'm seeing is more popular lately is kind of flipping that around, asking their preferences first, then offering subscriptions. And then the last step in the process is, okay, now that you've told us all of that, can we just have a little bit of information about you so that we can then get this information to you? You have a play with it. You can play and have fun with that. So remember your email groups that we talked about. So whether that's your subscriptions, those email groups are the subscriptions that you would be offering. All right, I'm running a little bit over time here and I apologize, but just quickly, tailoring of the campaigns. So now that you've got all this information stored, both at the contact level and the relevant email group subscriptions, now you can start to combine the profile data with their express preferences, the things they've told you they're interested with, or interested in, plus you can then start to include digital body language. So website page visits, for instance, could be another indication as to why you should be sending them certain information as well. So bring those things all together. Let's say we have a scenario, it's Hogwarts, open day, the university's campus is alive, and we've got people coming from all sorts of places, but it's also running as a virtual event. What you may do differently as a result of having all of this information is first find out who's actually subscribed to both in-person or virtual events. So they're your baseline groups, probably 2 segments that you might create within Eloqua. Do we know the types of spells they're interested in studying? So if we've been asking these questions along the way, we can then start to tailor those invitations based on the interests that they've already expressed to you. Now, as a preference, you may also want to talk to them about reminders. So would they like an SMS reminder? Would they like an email reminder? Would they like Hedwig the Owl to deliver their reminder? Whatever the case may be. And then, of course, off we go and activate the campaign. Now, how is that different to what we're doing today? Chances are today you probably have one segment. You may be manually uploading lists versus looking at express preferences and subscriptions that people have done. And maybe we're not even asking for, would they like an SMS reminder? A great way to get people to hang on to events and come along. And then you activate your campaign and Shazam, you're done. All right. So in relation to release 24C, just quickly, as I said earlier, we don't have the information available just yet. We'll have it in the blog though. So once you get the thank you for attending for this session, there'll be a link to the blog post and you'll find information there. So I look forward to you having a look at that. Feel free to scan those QR codes if you'd like to do that. Then finally, for next month, it's 8th of August next month and live for the Americas and EMEA. And we're still finessing the topic, but it's going to be more data oriented, kind of taking that last section of today's webinar in how to use the data in your campaigns. We're going to kind of take that and expand on that for next month. So we look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much for making some time. Sorry I've taken you over the mark by 5 minutes. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.